So before we get too deep into this video, I'm not an Xbox hater. I'm not a Nintendo YouTuber, and I'm not an Xbox hater. I don't understand where this whole sort of motion came from. Do I talk negatively about Xbox stuff? Yeah, sometimes I do. I also talk negatively about Nintendo stuff. I also talk negatively about Sony stuff. It's video game industry stuff, and if I don't like something, there's no one company or one individual that's going to rise above anything. Except for maybe Sega, because I have a little bit of a soft spot for them as a child growing up in a Sega world, and Sega was the best. But on a serious note, we have to talk about the current state of Xbox, because obviously everyone has been talking about this recent Phil Spencer interview that he did on the Kinda Funny Games Xcast podcast, in which he said some things that were really jarring for a lot of Xbox fans, and it's stuff that I kind of want to go over. I was going to do a bunch of notes and stuff and like highlight each individual quote that I want to go on, but I decided I didn't want to do that. And I didn't want to, micromanage this video down to a script. I kind of just wanted to speak from the heart and speak from the things that I think Xbox has a problem with, more so than what the Phil Spencer interview said. Now, obviously, the big buzz line, the big tag word that was taken away from this Phil Spencer interview was the fact that he said that they would be wrong to think that just building great console titles could help it overtake Sony and Nintendo in terms of hardware sales. That's the big takeaway from it. But really, the more interesting stuff from this interview was the fact that how they're sort of building their business, at least in their eyes. And obviously that falls a lot on things like Game Pass, this, that, the other. So that's a quote that we're definitely going to talk about. And there's one other quote that I did want to highlight from it, because it's just kind of the mindset that we see with Xbox in general. I see a lot of pundits out there who want us to go back to the time where we had all cartridges and discs, and every new generation was a clean state and you could switch the whole console share. That is not the world we are living in today. There is no world where Starfield is an 11 out of 10 and people start selling their PlayStation 5. That's not going to happen. So when we look at Xbox as a company, really since the Xbox One era, there has been one main focal point that people have been sort of harking on, people have been looking at, because Xbox during the Xbox One era tried to do a bunch of different things to sort of see what would stick. When you look at the launch lineup of the Xbox One, I don't even necessarily think it was all that bad. You had some interesting titles, games like Rise, which, it wasn't a fully fleshed out game, I felt, but I thought it was something very fun. I thought it was something that was cool and something that could definitely be built upon in further sequels. You, of course, had all your standard Microsoft properties that were available there on day one, but as time went on with the Xbox One, there was a noticeable decline in the quality of first-party titles within this ecosystem. It wasn't hitting like Nintendo games were necessarily. It wasn't hitting like PlayStation games were necessarily. Obviously, Nintendo was coming out of the Wii U era, and they kind of had to start anew with the Switch, but Xbox had a lot of time between the launch of the Xbox One and the launch of the Nintendo Switch to sort of, get a foothold in the marketplace, but they failed to do such. With Sony, of course, Sony was sort of focusing on these more cinematic, narrative-driven, one-player experiences, whereas Microsoft was kind of going in the different direction. They were kind of banking on games like Crackdown and, doing another Gears of War and stuff, and it was okay, but it was clear that after the Xbox 360 era, Microsoft had lost a bit of a step. And PlayStation was doing very well in things like console sales, in things like software sales, and just, recognition in the marketplace. Is that a death sentence, though? Because really, what Phil says here, there's no world where Starfield is an 11 out of 10 and people start selling their PlayStation 5s. That's not going to happen. You're pretty much saying that you're at a death sentence with the Xbox consoles, and as far as, consoles being put out into the marketplace. Obviously, a lot of this is contingent on things like Game Pass. Microsoft has been pushing Game Pass down our throats, which was a good idea during the Xbox One era, because let's be realistic. If Microsoft did not have Game Pass, they would be in a much worse situation than they probably would be in right now. I don't really see any sort of world where people are wanting to buy an Xbox with the quality of the first-party titles that we've gotten thus far and the styles of first-party games, which we'll talk about in just a second, if Game Pass didn't exist, because Game Pass allows you a huge library of classic games, new games, third-party games sometimes. It's very good. I enjoy using Game Pass, but that seems to have just overtaken everything else. That's overtaken, console sales. That's overtaken, game sales in general, because you never hear about software sales for a Microsoft platform, because if a game is on Game Pass, you have to imagine that most people that own an Xbox also have Game Pass. So they're not going to purchase the game at a store. They're just going to simply get the game off of Game Pass. That's kind of how the whole mantra works. And I know I just alluded to the fact that Microsoft has had some highly rated games, because that's something that a lot of people tend to bring up. You know, when you say, oh, you know, Game Pass fodder, because there's a stigma about Game Pass. People say, well, wait a second. You had games like Hi-Fi Rush. You had games like Microsoft Flight Simulator. And yes, both of those games were very good in their own rights. When you look at a game like Hi-Fi Rush, that was a really fun AA style game, a much needed addition to the Xbox library. And I think a lot of people enjoyed it. Didn't have any sort of, you know, longevity or staying power or talking about the game after the fact. Not really, but a lot of single player games don't. The Microsoft Flight Simulator thing. Yes, it reviewed very high. It was one of the highest rated reviewed games of the year that it came out, but it's also a very niche game. You know, this is a very niche game. You can look at the Forza series as well, a franchise that I absolutely love. Okay, I absolutely love Forza, but let's be realistic. Racing games, flight simulator games, AA games, those are a little bit more niche than your big AAA titles. And that's where Microsoft always seems to have an issue. It always seems to have a problem of overpromising and under-delivering, at least since the Xbox One era. You remember the whole Crackdown 3 situation, where Crackdown 3's destruction elements could only be done by the power of the cloud, and it was going to be this amazing experience, and it was a dud when it came out. Halo Infinite might have gotten high review scores, but let's be realistic. The multiplayer is one of the main components of Halo, and the multiplayer for Halo Infinite still is not where it needs to be for a game that was supposed to be as big as this, that was supposed to be as massive as this, that was supposed to be, you know, generation shifting for Xbox. The return of Halo, you know, Halo coming back to greatness, and everyone's leaving the company. Everyone involved with the game is leaving the company. You know, there's still fundamental problems with it. There's still tons of game modes missing and maps that are, you know, kind of on the light side and stuff like that. Now they're you know, pushing into Forge because they want people to use Forge more often. The Game Pass stigma. I definitely feel like it's sort of a thing, because when you think about it, there has to be a sort of breaking point with Game Pass. There has to be. Like, I can't imagine a world where there's not a breaking point with Game Pass, because if you're paying companies to put their games onto Game Pass because of the fact that their games are not going to sell on your platform, eventually that's gonna, you know, that's gonna negate itself. You're gonna reach a market peak with people that have Game Pass, whether it's on, you know, PC or on their Xbox, because there's just people that are not going to be interested in something like that. They're going to prefer a different way to get their games, and maybe that's a bit archaic in thinking and stuff like that. Obviously, there's still tons of physical collectors out there, but people like to buy stuff. You know, it's just kind of the way it is, and Game Pass just feels like this kind of overwhelming thing at times, where there's so much stuff on there, you don't know what's good, but you don't know what's bad, and then, you know, do you end up spending time with a single game, or do you just sample a lot of different games? I have to go back though and think about last June, because I feel like last June was kind of a turning point for Xbox. I feel like it was something that if you met this promise, I think people would have been, you know, much better with this interview. I don't even think this interview with Phil Spencer would have been necessary, because you talked about games that were perceived to be great games that were going to help the Xbox system. You gave Xbox fans and those who own an Xbox console, because there's a lot of people that own an Xbox Series console, you gave us hope that these things, that this self-imposed guideline that you guys gave yourself, this was going to be how we're gonna turn things around. Xbox is gonna have a huge 2023. You're gonna be overwhelmed with the amount of quality. You promised 3 main games at that presentation. I'm not talking about smaller projects, I'm talking about main exclusive games for the Xbox system. Not available on PlayStation, not available on Nintendo, available on PC. Redfall, Starfield, Forza Motorsports 8. You said, a self-imposed deadline, that within 12 months of June to June, so next month is June, that we would have those 3 games, and they're going to be of high quality. They're going to be awesome experiences. Starfield did not make the cut. Forza Motorsport 8 did not make the cut. Starfield at least has a release date. Forza Motorsport 8 doesn't have a release date. Redfall barely made the cut. came out in May. And should it have came out in May? No. The only reason that Redfall came out in May is simply because if you did not have at least one of those games come out, you would look like the biggest embarrassment because you're lying to your consumer base. These are problems that Sega had back in the day. A lot of younger kids won't remember this sort of stuff, but Sega would always kind of overpromise and underdeliver on certain things. Look at the fact that there was no, traditional new Sonic the Hedgehog for Sega Saturn when that should have been available on day one. Sega tended to overpromise and underdeliver, and I just feel like Microsoft is at this point, it almost feels like Groundhog Day, where it's always this year is going to be the year. Don't worry, guys, this year is going to be the year. And then the year comes along, and it's not. Redfall is a very mediocre game. It's a game that's extremely buggy, extremely glitchy. But even people that own an Xbox and people that own Game Pass, they're not playing this game. The fans are not playing this game. The Xbox fans are not playing this game. Because when you look at the achievements that I'm unlocking and Nate and John and MVG are unlocking, it's minuscule amounts, and we're only a few hours into the game. It's not a very long game by any stretch of the imagination, but you play this game, you look at this game, and then you think of a game like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. You think of a game like God of War Ragnarok. You think of a game like Spider-Man 2. Why can't Microsoft do these things? They're acquiring all these companies, and we're supposed to believe that all these companies are supposed to churn out quality products. Arcane never misses. But when you have a feeling of mismanagement, when you have a situation where it's been, a disappointing run, and you have people that overhype these games to their audience, and when they come out, they disappear and move on to the next sort of hype thing that goes on with this, you create this culture where, people feed into it. People believe the hype. And then when it's not what they want it to be, you have to hype up the next thing. I want Microsoft to succeed. Competition is amazing for the video game industry. If we didn't have competition, video games would not be where it is right now. If you didn't have Nintendo and Sega battling it out and then Sony coming into the mix, the video games would never be at this peak because there was no reason to. We would still be on the NES. We would still have 8-bit graphics, cool graphics, but there would be no reason for this. But it seems like Microsoft and Phil Spencer in general, he doesn't want competition. He doesn't see it as competition. He sees it as you're within the same space, but you're going to try to do something different because if you made great games, it wouldn't necessarily make people buy an Xbox. Why do people buy a Nintendo system? To play Mario, to play Zelda, to play Animal Crossing, to play Mario Kart. Why do people buy a PlayStation system? To play The Last of Us, to play God of War, to play Spider-Man. These games did not just appear overnight. Some of these games have long lineages. Some of these games have long histories of high quality titles. You're right, Phil Spencer. It's not going to make people bring all of a sudden, sell their PlayStation to get Starfield. Because if you have an anomaly once in a while, that's not enough incentive. This is something that's been built upon with years of trials and tribulations, successes and failures. For every Animal Crossing New Horizons, which sold a ridiculous amount of copies, you had an Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival, which fell flat on its face. It's crazy to me to think that you're done in the console sphere. You're done. We can't do anything. We can't do it. PlayStation's beat us. Oh, well. Do you not remember the Xbox 360 era? It wasn't that long ago, Phil. The Xbox 360 was a great system. The Xbox 360 got a sizable lead until the PlayStation 3 caught up. But it was a flip of a coin. When the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 were announced, it was a flip of the coin. Which was going to be the more successful system? Do you remember the Wii U, Phil? 13 million sold. Nintendo does that in a quarter now. Sometimes. It's crazy to just roll over and die, just to be like, well, we tried. We're not really worried about console sales anymore. We're worried about Game Pass and bringing games to Game Pass, and I guess Starfield's going to be the really good game that comes to Game Pass that sucks people in. I don't get it. I don't get it, and it's a shame because I want Xbox to be good. I like the Xbox. I like my Xbox controller. I like my Xbox interface. I prefer to use my Xbox Series X over my PlayStation 5. If I buy a third-party game, I'm buying it on the Xbox Series X. Resident Evil 4 remake. I bought it on the Xbox Series X. I like the controller better. I like the interface better. But it's crazy to me. It's crazy how it just feels like Xbox is kind of giving up a little bit. You got to remember one thing. This is how we're going to close this video because I've been all over the damn place with it. Sony needs their video game division. Sony's video game division is one of its most profitable divisions of the company. Nintendo, they're branching out into other things, theme parks, movies, and stuff like that. But Nintendo is contingent on video games. Microsoft, the video game department for them is one of their weakest. Always has been. It's not what brings in revenue. It's almost like a pet project. And if you can make some money off of it, cool. You know, you're putting your products out there into the world, into the business space, into the gaming sphere to try to get people to play on Microsoft and Xbox branded things. But you have to imagine eventually the shareholders and the higher ups are going to see some writing on the wall with this and be like, you know, is this worth it? Is this direction that we're going in worth it? Are we doing well in terms of profitability, or are we just, you know, hemorrhaging money? We don't know. We don't know because we don't really see the financials too much. And Microsoft keeps a lot of that stuff close to heart. But I want to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments section down below. This video ended up going way longer than I thought it would. I guess I just had a lot to say about the situation. I mean, there's obviously a lot of stuff to cover, and it's something that, you know, people are taking it as an opportunity to dunk on Microsoft, but I kind of just want to have a perspective of like kind of open-mindedness and be like, hey, you know, why are we at this stage? Like, how did we get here? And why is this our line of thinking when obviously there's a whole legion of people out there who don't want this? They don't want you to go down this road. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you are new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share. Hit the bell notification as well. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.